I'm going to welcome everyone today, but particularly Stuart Ashman, who's joining us from Santa Fe, New Mexico. And Stuart is a cultural ambassador who's worked in the arts for over 30 years, was raised in Cuba, which is what he's going to be speaking about today, before his family relocated to New York, where he went to school, received different degrees specifically in the arts and in photography. And he was actually selected to participate in the Getty Museum's Leadership Institute. Currently, as you see in his little title at the bottom of his screen, he serves as the Chief Executive Officer of the International Folk Art Alliance. And today he's not presenting about that. Today he's really presenting about his past, his own experience growing up in Cuba, Judaism in Cuba. But just to share a little bit of his accolades, he's published numerous articles and exhibitions or exhibition catalogs, and he's also co-authored Photography New Mexico in 2009, Abstract Art in 2003, and Artistas Cubanos in 2006. I hope I said that with the correct accent.
Very good.
Sin acento. But we're really honored to have you today. And for those of you who don't know, he was actually introduced to us through the artists, the Rustic and the Janet Rustic that was, and Scheinbaum that were on earlier in May. And they said, hey, here's a great individual who has an amazing story to share. And that's how I met Stuart, and I am looking forward as well to your story. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Levy, Rabbi Levy. It's nice to be here with all of you. Usually folk musicians and folk artists and Jewish people always start with a story. So, you know, years ago, I was head of all the cultural agencies in New Mexico, and the museum, the History Museum, was doing an exhibit on Jewish pioneers. These were the Jews that came to New Mexico starting in the 16th century and then later in the middle of the 19th century. And we were doing an exhibit, and there was a fundraiser for it. And my son was 6 at the time, and I had just picked him up from his Taekwondo class. And I said, Sam, we have to stop at this place because they're having a party to raise money for this exhibit. And he said, what's the exhibit about? And I said, it's for the first Jews that came to New Mexico. And he said, were you one of them? Anyway, so I don't want to take too much time from my presentation so that I can give you a chance to ask me questions. But as Rabbi Levy said, I grew up in Cuba. My mother migrated to Cuba in 1927 from Lithuania. My father came from Latvia in 1936, and we lived there until 1960. So I left when I was 12 years old. I grew up in Cuba. I went to a Jewish school, Centro Israelita, it was called. And we did half a day in Spanish and half a day in Yiddish. So people tell me that I have a Spanish accent when I speak Yiddish. So I was always interested in, you know, how did the Jews come to Cuba? So I have this little presentation I put together, which I will share with you now if I can. Let's see, here it is. So, surprisingly, the first Jew that arrived in Cuba came with Columbus. And his name was Yosef ben Levi Halvi. And he was his interpreter and his first mate. And he was the first one, and when Columbus left, he stayed in Cuba, in Eastern Cuba. And then in really the focus of Jews in Cuba was in Havana. They came from New York to do the sugar business in the middle of the 19th century. In 1924, there were 24,000 Jews in Cuba, a mixture of Ashkenazi and Sephardim. We used to call the Sephardims Turcos because many of them came from Turkey. And in 59, there were 15,000 Jews in Cuba. And today there's an estimated 1,500 Jews in Cuba. A lot of them went to Israel, and then a lot of them exited after the revolution. However, the cemetery was founded in 1906. So that lets you know that there were already people dying at the beginning of the 20th century. So they were there for a lifetime. This is a photo of the entrance. They did a Holocaust memorial there. And under the memorial, they buried the bars of soap that were made from the remains of Jews. This is the big temple in Havana. It was built in 1957, and it's still very active. And when you go there, you think you're in a temple anywhere else. This is the downstairs entrance. Here's the shamus. They have a library, and let me see, is there a way I can do this with a full screen?
Yes, so if you go to the tab on top that says slideshow.
Yeah.
Okay, and then do from current slide all the way to the left. Just click on from current slide.
From
No,
beginning
no,
from current
that
slide.
one.
There we go, that's better. Thank you. So you can see this young woman here at the temple. She looks like a teenager anywhere. Here's a bar mitzvah boy wearing his tefillin. And this is the oldest synagogue in Havana, and it was the original Sephardic center. And now it's also the Sephardic center. And very interesting that the tourist signs include ADATH Israel with the Star of David. This is the Orthodox congregation in Havana, which is not very active, unfortunately. They had a kosher butcher for a while, but Havana doesn't have a rabbi at this point. So Levi, if you're looking for a vacation, this is the rabbi at the time. This is what the congregation looks like. And they even have their own yarmulkes. Here's a picture of, here are some pictures that are on the wall of the lobby. And over here is a picture of Raul Castro visiting the temple. I don't know if you can see my cursor or not.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, good. And, you know, because Cuba has the kind of economic problems that they have, the women at ADATH Israel make dolls to raise money for the temple. And in fact, in the 90s, when the Soviet Union pulled out of supporting Cuba, all the Jews got together and they put together their rations of flour, eggs, sugar, and salt, and yeast, and they created a bakery. And I'm told it was the best place to get bread in Havana. You could buy challah in Havana. In fact, I have a T-shirt that says, "Challah por favor," challah please. And here's the ark at the Orthodox temple. And this is Shabbat services. You can see these people look a little like us. And here's a bat mitzvah. You know, there was a lot of interracial marriage in Cuba, and people adopted the religion. And then there are temples in other cities in Cuba, in small towns. They use somebody's living room as the gathering place. This is Caibarien, a very small town in the center of Cuba. This is Cienfuegos on the southern coast. This is in Guantanamo in the eastern part of Cuba. Guantanamo is not just a prison, it's actually a province. Sancti Spiritus, which is another small province. And this is the Ark at BETH SHALOM. And here's a memorial plaque with, you know, names that we would almost recognize, except maybe for the first names, Alberto, Pedro, and Jacobo. But at this point, I have to tell you a little story as well, because my uncle, Yakov Kravitz, that's my mother's brother. My grandmother's maiden name was Shochen, which, as you know, means neighbor. And so my Uncle Jack took the name Yakov Shochen, and he lived in Cuba, and he married a woman from Texas. And they came to this little town outside of Dallas, and they built a general store, and it was Jack Shaw's General Store from Yakov Shochen. And that's my quick presentation. You know, Israel and Cuba have had a very good relationship for many years. The current government doesn't like the treatment of the Palestinians, and it's caused a rift. But for the most part, Israel came to Cuba to show them how to grow oranges. And they, you know, as they did in the Negev, they, through various forms of irrigation, created citrus plants all over the island, which resulted in oranges, tangerines, and grapefruits, which they didn't have too many of before. So I'll stop the share, and I'll let you ask me any questions, or if you want another story, I'm happy to tell you another story.
Well, before you do stories, are you able to return to Cuba as a...
Yes, actually, I go there 3 or 4 times a year, and my wife runs cultural trips to Cuba, and she goes 4 or 5 times a year. Right now, you can't go because of the COVID-19, but I was there in January, and we have 2 trips planned for January and February of 2021, if we're allowed to do it, because of the virus.
Right, right. Has Cuba been sharing their, Lou, we'll get you in a second. Has Cuba been sharing the extent of Corona there?
Yes, I get a daily bulletin from them, and they pretty much have it under control because they've tested most of the population. And they have medical teams that go door to door and take your temperature and test you.
Wow. All right, Lou, you had a question.
Now, how many Jews are in Cuba now?
They estimate somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500.
And so and how many 2 HAVANA congregations?
HAVANA has 4 temples, but only 2 of them are active. One is very active. They have Shabbat services every Friday night. And the other one is an Orthodox. So it's used ceremonially for somebody that wants to do something by the book.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the other is more, in fact, I was there on a Friday night, and the minyan was 11 women and 1 man, because they didn't have enough men to do a minyan. And you know, there's people that remember maybe one grandparent was a Jew, and so they now adopt the religion. Interestingly enough, you know, the regime didn't really prohibit religion, but looked down on religion because it was thought of as superstition. But Fidel understood that Judaism was more than a religion. So he left the Jews alone. I mean, obviously he nationalized their businesses, but in terms of their temple and everything else was left intact. And the woman who is the president of the temple, when you talk to her, you think you're talking to somebody from Brooklyn. You know? Her name is ADATH. She speaks perfect English. And she says, you know, you left, but we stayed.
I see, Judy, you wanted to ask a question?
Yeah, I learned actually at my 50th high school reunion about a young fellow. He was 9 years old, and he was somehow able to get into the United States. I don't know whether they put him on a boat or what it was, but he was by himself. They bought him a room in a rooming house, and I guess one person knew about his situation, and he was able to go to a high school. I mean, as I say, 50 years later, I learned about it, and he was telling us how terrible it was in Cuba, and his parents did it for him to give him a better life. So here, you know, you come on, you're all smiles and really a Hamish guy and all of that. And I'm just wondering what your experience was.
Well, you know, I think, you know, a lot of the Jews in the middle class in Cuba in general had, you know, properties and businesses and so on. And the revolution mandated that everything became nationalized. And obviously there were some abuses to that. And some people did not like the ideology. And so
you want to come down here?
In my personal experience, we had a rented apartment with some furniture and a car. And my parents were adventurers, and my father said, let's go to New York. We'll do better there. He didn't think that there was anything particularly wrong with the government, but he didn't think it was going to lead to his prosperity. You know, and he was a young guy, he was in his 40s, so he thought, let's do it. There's all kinds of stories from both sides. But from my experience, I can't say that we were, you know, threatened or jailed or anything like that. Now, I don't know what year that 9-year-old boy came, but there was this myth perpetrated by the US intelligence agencies that Fidel was going to send all the children to Moscow. And so 14,000 parents sent their kids to the United States, many of them through Catholic relief services. And that was kind of tragic because some of them ended up without their parents for 2 years or more. And it was kind of sad.
Well, this would have been in 1957, thereabouts.
Oh no, the revolution was in 59, so.
So it was, I don't know, he's not Jewish. So I don't know. How old were you when you left?
12.
12.
Yeah, you know, the regime before Fidel was pretty nasty. You know, they were killing people left and right, assassinating high school students that protested and so on. So it could have been during that time as well. But I'll tell you a quick little story. There was a guy named Julio Lobo, Sephardic Jew, who was the king of the sugar empire. And at one point, there was a shortage of sugar, and the United States wanted to buy sugar from Cuba, and they offered him 3 cents a pound for it. And he said, well, let me think about it. And so he went and he got all of his investors together and he bought all the sugar in the world that he could get a hold of. And then he came back to the United States and he said, I'll sell you sugar, but it's at 11 cents a pound. And so he managed to use his seichel, a good Cuban word, to get what he needed. And then later, when the revolution came, Che Guevara called him into his office about 18 months after the revolution. And he said, you know, Mr. Lobo, we haven't touched your business, even though we've nationalized all of the industries. And Lobo said, yes, and I appreciate that very much. And, you know, you're standing in front of Che Guevara, who could have you killed any minute. And he said, but now's the time for you to demonstrate that you believe in this revolution. So here's what we propose. We nationalize the sugar industry and we'll name you the Minister of Sugar. And you'll have a home and a car and a driver and a salary commensurate with what we pay ministers, $2,500 a year or something like that. And Lobo said, well, let me think about it over the weekend, sir. I really appreciate the offer. And Guevara shook his hand. It was very cordial. And the next day he boarded a plane and left for Spain and never came back. So that's not an atypical story of people leaving for those reasons. I have a cousin who was a civil engineer and he had just bought a brand new Mercedes because he was an engineer, he had money. And so when the revolution came, they assigned a driver for him. So every morning the driver would come and take him wherever he wanted, but it was also a way to watch what he was doing. So he left as well. And I think there's a lot of stories like that, Judy, that, you know, that people resent the country for. And that's
what year did you leave?
I left in
1960.
Eisenhower declared that Cubans, and my parents were Cuban citizens, that Cubans could come and get immediate green cards. So that was in June of 1960, and we came in September.
Rabbi, excuse me, isn't Trump trying to cancel all the cultural trips? We went 5 years ago and it was wonderful, but I think he's trying to do away with those cultural trips now, if I believe I'm right.
Well, he changed the, he removed a lot of the criteria. One of them was people to people, which was something that Clinton started, and Obama continued it, and that's how most trips took place. So he took that one away, but there's another one called Support for the Cuban People. And it's basically the same thing, you just have to know what you're saying. However, the subtitle of Support for the Cuban People, and this is verbatim language from the US Treasury Department, is to promote the Cuban people's independence from Cuban authorities. Right, so that's what you're going there for. But the Cubans know that, the Cuban authorities know that that's what's in the rule, and they don't, you know, they don't pay attention to it. They know that that's not why you're there. And you know, it's a pretty wonderful country.
Oh, it is. It was wonderful. We enjoyed every last minute.
Did you go around the island or just?
Well, we only did, we did 4 days. My basic thing was to get to Havana, and I took other people with me, and we got out into the country a little bit. But I, well, you know, really just wanted to see Havana and the, you know, what went on. The hotels were in dire need of repair and, you know, left from way back when. But the food was wonderful. The people were wonderful. We ate in people's houses, which they turned into, I forget, there's a name for it. It starts with a P. I don't remember. Paradors?
Or
Parador, I think they call it. And it was wonderful. Yeah, so that was the great part of it. So.
Yeah, well, you know, again, speaking of the Jews, the Jewish mafia had a lot to do with the development of Cuba and the casinos. I mean, Meyer Lansky built the Hotel Nacional, the Hotel Riviera.
Oh, that's the main, yeah, the old hotel.
Yeah, and actually there's a neighborhood in Old Havana, which is where all the Jewish wholesalers were. And it's called Calle Muralla. And there's a hotel there that is called Hotel Raquel. And they have the 10 Commandments in the lobby as a commemoration of the Jewish merchants that lived and worked in that neighborhood.
Well, F. Scott Fitzgerald had a lot to do with the islands. So there was a lot of stuff about the places he went and his home. And that was very interesting too.
And, and of course, Hemingway had a house there.
Oh, gorgeous.
You know, and
I think I meant Ernest Hemingway, not Fitzgerald. He the one, yeah, Hemingway. Hemingway is the one that lived there, right? I'm sorry, I got it wrong.
Yeah, and you know, he's legendary.
Oh yeah, he's the big in the bars and everywhere. It's just
he supposedly invented the mojito.
Right, the mojito. That's the big thing. Yeah,
Yeah,
they taught us all how to make mojitos. We went to the bar. Yeah, I'm sorry, I just got the name, but I couldn't remember which one it was.
Yeah.
But it was very interesting.
Well, I had a really great relationship with Hemingway House, and in fact, when I went there once with the governor of New Mexico, the director showed me the house, and she said, you know, the house is exactly the way he left it, because he left Cuba to go to Idaho, and then he committed suicide.
He committed suicide, right.
But he had left the house to the Cuban people. Right. So it became a museum. And she said, everything is the way he left it, except somebody stole the telephone. So she said, well, I said, why don't you get me a picture of the phone or the name of the phone, and I'll see if I can find you one to replace it. And she got me a picture of it. And the next time I went back, I got her the phone. And so she let Governor Richardson, who was the governor of New Mexico, pose with the phone in the same pose that she had with Hemingway.
Hemingway, right.
He's on the phone like this, yeah. And Richardson's like this. And then she let my wife have a picture of herself in the same position as Hemingway.
Did you get to walk into the house? Because you really can only go around it.
Yes, I did several times because of, you know, my stature, I guess. And also they found Hemingway's car, which was a 55.
The cars are amazing.
He had a 55 Chrysler New Yorker convertible. Mm-hmm. And so they found it, and somebody bought it. Somebody from California bought it and gave it to the museum. And now they were working to restore it.
Well, you know, they had, the cars are so old that they don't have the parts. So they take the cars from the 50s and the parts from now and readapt them to the cars. It's amazing.
Yeah.
They don't even run on gasoline anymore.
It's like the Flintstones, with their feet. I'm just joking. I'm going to try to get some more questions in over here. Rhoda, I saw that you had a question.
Yeah, two, briefly. Number one, is there anti-Semitism in Cuba? And two, you left right after Castro came into power. Was it difficult to get out of the country?
No, the first question is, there isn't any anti-Semitism. There was a period in the late 40s, right after, maybe a couple of years after World War II, where there was some anti-Semitism, but it was quelched very quickly. There may be some of the stereotypical there in those days, not anymore, because they don't even, I think it's more non-sectarian culture. I mean, you know, nobody's really a Catholic or a Protestant or anything like that. They have a picture of Jesus and a picture of Fidel on the wall. And, you know, they revere Moses because he's from the Bible, but they don't really connect with that. Now, as far as when we left, all you had to do was go to some office and request a permit to leave the country, and they gave it to you right away. Later, it became more difficult. My aunt came in 1962. She was a Holocaust survivor, and they nationalized her business. And she, you know, she was distraught to have military people coming to her business until her business is nationalized, and she could stay as the manager on salary. She walked away in tears and never came back. And then when she was leaving, they came and inventoried the house. And then they only let her take out certain things like 3 dresses, and you know, she came with an overnight bag after living in Cuba for 30 years. But the good news was that this young man that worked for the family for years was a big deal in the party. And so he inherited the house. We left him the house. And that helped things for my aunt, certainly in 1962.
Thank you.
Sharon, you want to ask a question?
Well, not really a question. I had an opportunity to visit Cuba on one of the cultural trips, and it was so enlightening. I just wanted to share a couple things that happened that I witnessed. I became very close with my tour guide. In fact, we still communicate by email when he can get to it. But when I first got there, I said, I have some things to take, and do you know where this address is? I have some, I took an entire suitcase of necessary items to leave in Cuba. And he said, oh yes, I was just there on Monday to pick up some Advil for my mother. And you know what I'm talking about. It's in the shul. They turned the upstairs into a pharmacy. I don't know, I came on a little bit late, so I think it was BETH SHALOM, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, and but it was beautiful. I was very fortunate. I went out, we got out into the countryside. We stayed at some kind of a resort near the beach, and it was really quite beautiful. I was very much taken by the horse carts. That's their main mode of transportation, because so many people have really moved into the city. They overeducated, and nobody really wants to work the farms, as I understand it. I may be wrong, so correct me, please, if I am.
No, you're right. You know, I think the industry, I mean, there's a dual economy. There's the Cuban peso, and then there's this other thing that they came up with.
The kooks.
Yeah, the convertible peso, which is basically monopoly money.
Mm-hmm.
So when you go to Cuba, you can't use your dollars. So you go and you trade $100 and they give you 87 kooks. So basically it's a 13% lodger's tax. And then you use your kooks as if they were dollars. And that's how the economy works in Cuba, at least right now. And so the general public doesn't earn kooks, they earn pesos.
That's right.
The peso is 1/25th of a kook. So if you make 1,000 pesos a month, you're really only making $40. And that's what you hear is, you know, these people are making $40 a month. Well, they're not making $40 a month, they're making 1,000 pesos. But the peso is limited in what it can buy. You can't buy a pair of Nikes for $40. So you have to rely on family bringing you that stuff. You can have rice and beans and sugar and salt and coffee and chicken and eggs and all of that, but that's about it, you know.
No soap. The soap is at such a premium, soaps and shampoos. I was astounded. These young women would stand as our bus would pull in with their hands out. Do you have soap? Do you have shampoo you can give me?
Yeah, well, that's a learned, they trained themselves that way. During the 90s, there was a shortage of things like that. And so that was a way of begging for the tourists. And it just kind of carried through because there's plenty of soap now.
Well, I asked my guide and he said no. When he said to me, he says, if you have any shampoos from your hotels, I would really appreciate it for my mother.
Yeah, shampoo they really like. And
yeah, because they have some kind of a soap that they're given that's more like Tide to wash and bathe in, and it's harsh on the skin, and that's why they want the better soaps. But I wanted to show you something. This is one of my treasures I picked up. I'm sure you're familiar with the artist Fusco. Are you familiar with him?
Fuster, yeah.
Yeah. Fuster. And I met him. I was fortunate enough to meet him. And he personally signed this to me. But he took an entire city block in Havana, and he's done it in mosaic and artwork, and it's just beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful.
Well, so he's the Cuban Gaudi, you know.
Yes, definitely, definitely. But I have one quick story I do want to relate to you. As I said, I became very close with my guide, and one day the bus was stalled because there was some construction going on. And I look out the window, and there are 5 workers standing around just looking in a hole, just staring in there and kind of talking with one another. It was very evident they weren't trying to solve a situation. They were just taking up time. And I looked at him and I said, Adel, what is that all about? And he looked at me and he said, we pretend to work and they pretend to pay us. And I thought that just explained everything.
About right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And what is the name of the woman that runs the pharmacy in that shul? I can't remember.
If it's the same Ada Dworin.
Yeah, little tiny woman with dark hair. Yeah, very tiny. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. She was appreciative of everything I brought in.
Yeah, I mean, they have a lot of shortages. In fact, when I was there in January, there was a shortage of flour. So people didn't have bread. And, you know, we were staying at this very fancy hotel. And one of my travelers, because we took a group of 20 people, got wind of the fact that she didn't have any bread. So at the breakfast buffet, he kept taking slices of bread and putting them in napkins and bringing them out to her. You know, nice. brought her 2 loaves of bread, piece by piece.
Unfortunately, I didn't stay I stayed at the old Hilton. I'm sure you know where that is.
The Havana Libre.
Exactly. And we were on the 23rd floor. Well, this hotel has a bank. I think the woman ahead of me mentioned, you know, the disrepair of the hotels, had a bank of 6 elevators, of which never more than 2 operated at the same time. And it was 25 or 26 floors. Many times, we were on the 23rd floor. Many times I walked down because you just couldn't wait for an elevator. Never up, but down.
Well, just to the left of that building is the Foxa, which is the tallest building in Havana. And it was built in 1958 for condominiums, like a cooperative. You could buy an apartment. And of course, now it's all vacant. It's 32 floors and the elevators don't work. So you could rent, the higher you go, the less the rent is.
Of course. I felt so bad. These elderly gentlemen were schlepping our bags up 23 flights because they couldn't use the elevators. Those were for the guests. And there's no reception desk. All they have in the back is stacks of American dollars and being exchanged for kooks. And when I say stacks, I mean stacks of American dollars. And every morning, that was the first thing everyone did, is stand in line to exchange American dollars for kooks. And everybody treasured getting an American dollar over there. Yeah, thank you very much for letting me tell you about my experience.
You know, because my trips generally have take museum patrons and so on, they're, you know, VIP 4-star hotels. So we stay at the European-owned hotels. They just built 2 new ones that are, I've never stayed in a hotel like that. They're so over the top, fancy.
Really?
Yeah, and you know, I don't know how they're going to make it because the airport's closed in Cuba. The only way you can go is if you are a Cuban returning to Cuba. You know, you went to visit your aunt in Miami and COVID-19 happened, then you can get a permit from the embassy to get on a charter flight. And Cuba just opened up a little piece of tourism. You know, they have a bunch of islands on the north central part of Cuba, and you can have those kinds of beach vacations, but not for Americans because we're restricted on, we can't do recreational trips to Cuba. We can only do support for the Cuban people, or it used to be people to people, but they're basically flying Canadians and Europeans to this little group of islands, and they have to stay on the islands. They can't get off the islands. And that's how they're controlling the virus. You know, they have a lot of latitude because of the fact that it's an authoritarian government. You know, if they give a command, that's the story. You know, it's not like here where people think they don't have to wear a mask. Over there, if you're not wearing a mask, they take you to jail. So you better wear a mask. It's not a $50 fine or whatever. You know, it's serious business because it's your responsibility to protect your neighbor. It's not just about you not getting the disease.
That's right.
You know, and so, you know, there's good and bad to it all. And, you know, I've had a lot of interesting experiences in my trips. I've been going back since 1997. So I've probably gone 40 times or more, and have lots of friends, discovered childhood friends that I hadn't seen for 50 years. You know, it feels like home to me to a certain extent.
So I have a couple questions, and if anyone else does have a question, please either write it in the chat or unmute your mic. But I think just two questions that people might appreciate before you talk about a little bit more about the international folk art that I think a lot of people appreciate learning about as well. There's someone on here who I'm close to who actually told me about the beauties of scuba diving in Cuba, for those of you who don't know that. So it's got its own little destination because of the infrequent of, I guess, visitors to that part of Cuba. So it's got some really amazing snorkeling and scuba diving in Cuba. And then I guess since you talked about cultural visits and trips, maybe you can share a little bit more what that entails if someone was interested, not just cost, but what they visit and what the trips are all about.
Sure. So the snorkel and again, the benefit of an authoritarian government was that areas were banned because during the Batista era, the fisheries were all being exhausted. There was almost no lobster in Cuba. There was almost no red snapper. So Fidel said, you know, from point A to point B, nobody can go there. You can't fish, you can't swim, you can't bring your boat there. And so, you know, 20 years later, you had the habitat got rebuilt. So on the southern side of the island, there are all these keys. You know, Cuba has 1,600 islands around it. Very few with people living on them, but they're pristine. And they have coral reefs there that human eyes have never made contact with. So they're in their natural pristine state, which is very unusual in this day and age. One of the trips I took was on a sailing boat from the center of Cuba around the whole western part of the island. And they took us to this beach. And you know how people say that the sand was so fine it was like sugar? Well, this sand was like flour. It was that fine because nobody had ever even walked on it. And, you know, you look through the crystal clear water and there are fish there that are 3-4 feet long swimming, and they're not afraid of you because they've never even seen people. So the coral reef there is amazing. You know, I think they work hard to protect that. I think it's the most dire enthusiasts that even know about Cuba and, you know, would go for that particular trip. What was the other question, Rabbi, that you mentioned?
So when you or your wife, I think you said it's your wife who does
the cultural trips, yeah. So, you know, my wife is the one that really has developed the whole program. You know, originally when I was a museum director here in Santa Fe, I organized the trip in '99, and it was a big success, and they wanted to do more. So we did a couple more. And then over the years, I ended up with a job in California. And so the museums in New Mexico still wanted to do these trips, but I said, well, I can't do them for you here because I'm working over there. So she started doing them in both places. And we've developed all these contacts with artists, musicians, professors, etc. So, you know, a typical day might be you wake up in the morning, you have breakfast, and then you go see a private performance of a modern flamenco dancer. And then you go to an artist studio, then you go to lunch at a seaside or riverside restaurant. In the afternoon, you might go see that artist Fuster that we were shown earlier, which is an amazing experience. And maybe the National Art School. And then you go back to your hotel, have an hour to freshen up and go out to dinner and listen to music at the restaurant. And day in and day out like that. And then maybe on day 3 or 4, you get on the bus and you go 200 miles to another city to experience that particular part of the island and what they're doing there. One of the great things about the Cuban government and how they support the arts is every city has an orchestra and a choir. And if you're a musician and you're in the orchestra or the choir, that's your job. You know, you go rehearse and you get a paycheck. As minimal as it is, you're a professional musician sponsored by the government. And there are dance companies. All of that is supported by the government. So every town has an incredible choir that you go to, and we always listen to them. And then there are things that are surprising. You know, you go to a 16th century fortress that's, you know, made out of walls that are 4 and 5 feet thick. So there are these incredible chambers. And you come around the corner and there's 3 women sitting on a bench singing choral music a cappella. And they're licensed by the government to do that and earn tips. So those kinds of things are what make it so exciting. And again, you know, there's a lot of young people. Cuba has a lot of young people that are really interested in the world. So they learn how to cook, they learn how to dance, and they perform for you in every way.
Thank you. And is there a way that if someone wanted to learn more about that, does your wife have a website about that?
She doesn't have a website, but she has an email address, and that's how you contact her. It's Canyon Potts, CANYON Potts at AOL.com. She used to be a ceramicist. So it's canyonpots@AOL.com.
Okay, I put that in the chat if anyone was looking for that information.
Yeah.
And then if you don't mind talking about, first of all, the beautiful art behind you, but in general, I think people would appreciate, as I did when you were explaining it to me earlier, about the folk art market, and then maybe some featured artists that people might have heard about.
Sure. So, you know, as the rabbi said, I'm the CEO of this organization called the International Folk Art Alliance that runs an annual folk art market. So our mission really is to support artists through economic opportunities. The market has been happening for 17 years. Last year, we had 150 artists from 50 countries for a weekend, and they sold $3 million worth of folk art in 22 hours. 90% of that money goes home with them. We take 10% to help us run the market. And, you know, prices range from $15 to $10,000, $12,000, depending on what it is. Behind me, right over my head, is a piece that's not related directly to the folk art market. It was given to me by the cultural attaché of the Cameroon embassy years ago, and it's a weaving. And then to the left and right are two paper mache masks from Haiti. And then these guys that are so weird are from the Congo. And right over my ear here are two Ethiopian carvings. I happened to go to Ethiopia last August because my daughter was in the Peace Corps there. And I went to visit her with my wife. And I have to say, speaking of Jews again, Ethiopia is mostly a Coptic Christian country, but when you go to a Coptic Christian church and watch them pray, you think you're watching the ancient Hebrews. And of course, Ethiopia has a huge connection with Jewish history because the queen, the so-called Queen of Sheba, which was Ethiopia, went to Jerusalem and had an affair with King Solomon and came back to Ethiopia with her baby. And so that's a celebration every year that they have. And their new year is right around Rosh Hashanah. It's in September. So it's a very interesting country. So anyway, so the folk art market, we have a selection and placement committee. Artists from all over the world apply, and then they get selected. About 30 of them, if it's their first year, they can apply for financial assistance, and we pay for them to come here, and we pay for their hotel. And then they're free to sell their stuff on this weekend fair that we have. We also bring musicians in, and 25,000 people come to the market. The only opening night is on a Friday night, and we're limited to 2,100 people by fire code. So that's what we have that night. And then people pay $85 for what we call the early bird ticket. So they can come at 7 o'clock in the morning because the market doesn't open until 9. So if you pay $85, you can come and be one of the first in there. So obviously people are really interested in supporting the artists and supporting the organization and in taking home something beautiful. We just, this last weekend was the normal market weekend. And of course we couldn't do the market, so we did it virtually. So we had a virtual gala with a 20-minute video, and then we had an auction for 2 days. And, you know, people were buying at 3 times the value because they knew it was going to help the organization and it was going to help the artists as well. So there's a lot of passion. Last year we had 2,000 volunteers, and volunteers come from all over the world just to help, you know, help set up, give out water, sit in the booth with the artists and help them with the sales, all that kind of thing. So it's really an amazing thing. And if you're in Phoenix, you know, it's not a long drive to come in the summer, and you get away from some of the heat. It's plenty hot over here, but it's not as hot as it is in Phoenix in July.
Do you know Marianne and Bruce Larson, who are very active?
Of course.
Okay, yeah, we both went, Steve and I went to college with them, and I was president of our class, but they're very active there. We just went to see them last year for Santa Fe Market. I know their folk art is the big thing.
Yeah. Well, I've known them for many years. Bruce was the head of the Museum of Foundation.
Right.
And I was director of the art museum. So, you know, this is a small town. Everybody knows everybody.
Yeah, we went to college with both of them.
Ethel, did you have a question?
Yes, the folk art festival that you were speaking about, where is that held?
It's in Santa Fe. It's in this place called Museum Hill. There are 4 museums on top of just outside, well, it's in the city, but just outside downtown. And there's a big plaza there and a giant parking lot, and we take both of them over. We put these gigantic tents up. And just to give you an idea, to rent the tents for the weekend is $160,000.
Now, the market you were talking about, was that in Albuquerque, the Indian market?
No, the Indian market is in August, and that's also in Santa Fe. So there's three major markets here: Spanish market, Indian market, and the folk art market. And Indian market is probably the biggest, but it's a different format than ours. I mean,
and
they
I
have,
know you have the opera season is also in the summer.
That's right. Yeah, we coincide with the opera season. It usually starts around the 4th of July. So we're here the second weekend of July. And then we have what we call the center, the International Folk Art Market Center, which is a 7,500 square foot building with a retail space and a small area where we do this series called Folk Art Matters. So we might bring in a weaver from India, you know, with a half a container of her wares and put them on display, and then they do a talk. And we get, you know, a few hundred people for that. So we keep the place going all year round with that kind of activity. And this is on the normal times. Right now, you know, we're not doing anything because you can't go out, right?
Right. Someone messaged in the chat a question about the Cuban cigars. If you have something to share about that. They lived in Canada, and I know that America wasn't allowing it in. So it would go through Canada and people would sell it.
Now you can have Cuban cigars. You can bring them in. The limit on Cuban-made goods is just like anything else. It's $800 per person. So if you went to France and you bought $1,200 worth of clothing, you would have to declare it at customs. If you bought $800, you wouldn't have to declare it. So you could buy $800 worth of cigars or rum or whatever you want and bring it in. You can't sell it. It's only for personal use. And Canada, of course, never had that problem. You know, Canada is always been friends of Cuba. In fact, Canadians are probably the largest group of tourists that go to Cuba, Canadians and Italians. So yeah, there's an unfortunate thing happening, and I smoke cigars, so I can speak authoritatively. There's an unfortunate thing happening with Cuban cigars is that because of the need for the cooks that we were talking about, if you work in a cigar factory and you make 600 pesos a month, that's really not enough. And so they allow you to keep a cigar a day for your own use with, you know, you make it, but then you get to keep it. And so there's a lot of theft of those cigars because they're not going to search you on the way out. And then people also steal the boxes and the rings. And so basically a box of cigars that you'd have to pay $300 for in the store, you could buy on the street for $60. But it may not be the same quality. And so in a way, they're giving Cuban cigars a bad name around the world. And the Cubans are really trying to control that. It would be just like, you know, pouring some cheap wine into a fancy Robert Mondavi brand and put a cork on it and make it look like a Mondavi wine, but it's really not a Mondavi wine. So there's some of that happening. And, you know, then there's a lot of the Cuban cigar maker factories that left after the revolution and started the name with the same brand in places like Nicaragua and the Dominican Republic. And so you can buy the Cuban brand, but it's made in the Dominican Republic.
Jennifer, you had a question?
I wanted to ask the festival, the International Folk Festival, you said it's on Museum Hill. Is that where the International Folk Museum is?
Yes, right next to the Folk Art Museum.
Okay, God, that's the most wonderful place. We were there last April.
Uh-huh. Well, unfortunately, all those museums are closed right now.
It's terrible. Thanks.
Actually, just to, before Ethel, I see you might have another question, but Stuart did offer that we can sort of do that same presentation that he had done last weekend, and then he would be able to answer questions about the different artists that were featured. So we might schedule something in the future for that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to, you know, put a slideshow together with, and to talk to you about each of the artists that are in, because there's, some of them are just amazing, what their stories are, how they learned. You know, there's a Rwandan artist who was part of that tribal Holocaust that happened between the Hutus and the Tutsis.
Yeah.
And her husband was killed by the opposing tribe. And she had no way of making a living because all she did was, you know, feed the chickens and take care of the kids. And she remembered that her grandmother used to weave baskets. So she taught herself how to weave these baskets. And she taught about 20 other women to weave them with her. And they applied to the folk art market. And they came and they had a huge success. They sold $22,000 worth of baskets, and, you know, got a story in the paper and so on. And now she sells at Macy's, you know, so it just changed her life. So, you know, those kinds of stories are in abundance with our group. I have a guy, yeah, well, I have you here. Oh. So this is a guy who was a history professor, and he was making military vehicles to illustrate World War II. And he was making them out of recycled materials, paper, styrofoam, and everything else. And people said to him, why don't you start making the vehicles that we use around here? You know, and then the tourists will buy them. So here's a 1942 Dodge Power Wagon.
Fabulous.
Right. Look at every detail.
Wow.
And, you know, it's light as a feather, it's paper. It's poster board. So, you know, this is an artist, you know, when I first met him, he was selling them for $50. And I said, you can't sell these for $50. You got to get more money. So the next time I saw them, they were $60. I said, no, that's not what I'm talking about. So at this auction we had on Friday, we sold one of them for $900. Now that could change his life if he could, you know, because he can really produce them. And I actually have 40 of them at my house because on each trip that we go to Cuba, we bring 2 suitcases back in the expectation that he's going to come to the market. And of course, we couldn't have the market this year, so they're all sitting in my house waiting for the market.
Pretty amazing. Just to, someone asked privately if you don't mind sharing your wife's name, because it seems like they're going to contact her.
Yeah, her name is Peggy, and her last name is Gaustad, Gaustad.
I'll post that.
And, you know, you could share my email address too, Levy.
Okay.
You know, if they have I'm happy to connect.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Was there any last questions that anyone had for Stuart?
I don't have a question, but my grandson who plays baseball, well, he's since graduated at Oberlin, was an exchange student for 6 months in Cuba to play baseball.
Wow.
And when he was there, he did buy cigars for his personal use and brought them back. His father was very happy.
That's great. Well, you know, Cuba has 2 national sports, baseball and arguing about baseball.
Yeah.
Levy, this is Sid. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Yeah, we hear you.
Yeah, this is the first one of yours I've tuned into for obvious interest, with 155 countries of travel under my belt, and Cuba having been legally 155, got in on a marine biology trip and went to Jardines de la Reina. And as a passionate scuba diver all over the world, I will tell you that the Gardens of the Queen, and there's a fabulous YouTube by a guy I won't even name, but a fabulous YouTube video about Jardines de la Reina. And for me, traveling and diving the world, the Cuban waters are as you described earlier in this video, and it is one of my two ultimate destinations on planet Earth for diving with the crocodiles and the pristine waters, and the untouched status of those coral reefs is off the charts, along with the place known only to divers, Raja Ampat, outer Indonesia. But I just wanted to mention you are so right as a diver who has had the privilege of diving those waters with the dedicated Cuban marine biologists. So it was a fabulous trip for me in every way. También con hablando el español, it was particularly terrific. Look forward to meeting you personally and to more of these Zooms, Levi. This is the ultimate one you've done, at least for my taste.
I saw you on. I knew this was your style.
My style.
Rabbi, do you know Gloria and Phil Cowan?
I don't think so.
I'm going to connect you with them because they might be helpful to you. And
Okay,
they traveled to Cuba with me years ago. They're really wonderful people. They just moved to Phoenix about a year ago.
I'll look forward to that. Thank you very much for this. This was, I think, quite amazing. Thank you. And I will connect with you. I know that I've gotten messages privately to please do follow up with you about a folk art presentation. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Yes,
you.
and
Sorry we couldn't do this in person.
yeah, God willing, it'll be in person. I'll have to come to Santa Fe. I have reasons to.
You do, right?
Yeah.
You have a cousin here.
I've been there, just not during that weekend. But thank you. And just before we officially move to socializing, for those of you who don't know, on Friday, we have a presentation that is What You Do Matters. It's actually a presentation that's given to law enforcement in Arizona and around the country. We'll have a lieutenant from the Phoenix Police Department and a deputy county attorney from the Maricopa County Attorney's Office that they're going to share. It's a very powerful teaching vehicle taught to law enforcement. But I think what really connects to most of us here is it was actually created together with the Jewish Community Foundation in Prescott, together with the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. So again, it's going to be a fascinating presentation on Friday as well. But going back to today's, thank you so much. This was quite amazing. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Pleasure.
Thank you.